Hello there everyone and welcome back. First off, I would like to apologize for taking so long to get finally into Season 3, but with family and work in the way, it did prolong, if not slow down, my intentions to get these matches in. But we're going to get started nonetheless, and what I'm going to be doing and what the polls have decided is I'm going to be focusing on Asuryani at least for the majority of Season 3. There may be an occasion or two, especially with my Twitch streams, that I'm going to be playing with other factions to hopefully mix up some. But for the meat of the YouTube content itself, I'm going to be focusing a lot on the Asuryani, and with the buff to the point cost of the Phoenix ship, and well, not really much else. From what I could tell anyway to the Asuryani, I'm contemplating maybe experimenting with finally having a light cruiser in this fleet, since the Phoenix does offer the potential of more firepower, more health, and I do have a solid running ship that kind of makes things awkward. Although, with one torpedo charge to these dang light cruisers, it's going to be difficult to actually get value out of it otherwise. But the real reason I'm interested in the Asuryani in general is mainly dealing with like Tyranids, Corsairs, primarily Tyranids just because of how much more dangerous they can be. Well, actually, I got the wrong I got these ships backwards. I want the flagship to be the carrier. There we go. But I want to try and experiment and practice the idea of fighting stealth-oriented type of fleets with very limited vision to my part, which is kind of what the Asuryani brings, just because of how abysmal, how bad their frigates are. They're almost, well actually, let's just check it right now. They were what, 77, 78 points? 80 points, 74, and these things have only 200 health. Keep that in mind. And their firepower, for just as an easy comparison, their lance only does like what, 2 damage a second is how I'm going to be judging it here, so 30 seconds to its 15-second reload time, and then just instantly compare it to the, the Hellebore. Here it is. It's got a single pulsar which does basically 5 damage a second with its 3 shots going in, on top of the fact that it has 400 health and is basically the exact same price. I don't think I need to say much more, since the fragile trait, even though it was toned down a bit for Corsairs, just meant the only real risk the frigates had to suffer drastic critical hits was just in the fire results, as opposed to losing generators or engines or anything like that, which for the frigates is really damn convenient because they have emergency repairs, ideally at all times, if I'm smart with how my scanner pulses are utilized. So I feel like their one big negative is not really a negative at all, if utilized properly. So that's the main appeal I have with the Asuryani, on top of the fact they don't rely on stealth at all, and when you factor in the hollow field, they almost essentially have 83 armor for the purposes of how long they're going to survive against macro weaponry. That's how I'm going to be judging it. Sure, if they get hit by torpedoes, bombers, or even get rammed, that hollow field's not going to do me any good. But if I can effectively evade them, you should treat these in durability just like face off against Space Marines or even the Necrons to a vague extent, just with a lot more limited crew, which could bite me in the ass if I'm not careful. But I'm also going to be doing something completely different for the series. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the commentary for the matches after the actual matches themselves. If you haven't watched my championship series for Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1, it's going to be essentially the same kind of format. The only downside though is we're only doing best of 1 type of matches, as opposed to the best of 3 with persistent fleet destruction and damage results throughout that best of 3, since Armada 1 had a feature for its ranked mode where if ships got damaged, if they got destroyed, they were out of a match, maybe out of the entire best of 3 if they got completely destroyed. So you had to deal with attrition a little bit there in multiple facets, on top of different game modes that you had to choose from. But that's the idea. It's been a while since I did this type of format, and I am looking forward to this. I enjoy the Eldari the most, and Asuryani I was the most interested in just because they encourage being more in your opponent's face, just because of their heavier armor resistance. I just didn't, oops, excuse me, I hit the mic stand there, but I honestly wasn't expecting it to like be Corsairs and Drukhari being all about stealth-oriented type of play and avoiding combat altogether. So when you look at the Asuryani now, as opposed to before, when I was looking at the tabletop rules form, they are drastically different with the same kind of firepower essentially. But I've been talking on long enough, let's get this started. Okay, the matches begin. In the start off with, we're face off against Chaos and Saracen. Although, the one interesting to note going into Chaos, especially with the new portrait, it makes it really damn difficult to know what kind of sub-faction you're utilizing. And of course, Chaos specifically are kind of the one that do want that additional portrait to kind of help deny what to really expect. Although, since I'm doing the commentary after the match, I am going to let you know that Saracen is using Siege Favor with 6 slaughters, I believe is what his fleet was. I don't think I specifically targeted them to see what they were, but his fleet name suggested they were slaughters, and I'm going with that assumption. Even with the preparation that we're doing right now, I'm kind of contemplating what skills I'm utilizing, mainly because of that uncertainty. I was contemplating using maybe the beacon to help counteract any like winds of change favors, since again, I am limited in my vision, so Saracen having like a 45 seconds to kind of completely hide himself, especially if he's able to keep me at range, basically gives him a lot of free damage, even though I do have the resilience and durability to kind of weather the damage incredibly well. Although I am a little bit scarred by my Corsair experience of immediately losing my hollow field at the very beginning of matches, so it didn't really cross my mind here, but that is always a possibility too, isn't it? But with that said, I am going to deploy, this is normally how I'm going to deploy my fleets, 3x2 with the flagship kind of hanging back, and sometimes utilizing or at least benefiting from the additional range of its ships, but I ultimately decided to go for Stasis Bomb, Maelstrom, as opposed to the beacon, which I kind of was uncertain about, and this is where the speed difference, at least knowing if I'm up against slaughters, especially seeing 6 cruisers, is going to be really damn important. You will check in a moment here. Since those grids are 1,000 units in size, I am actively trying to count on how quickly they traverse that 1,000 units. Since Carnages, Despoilers, I'm getting the battleships confused again. But any of the normal Chaos cruisers go 200 unit speed, so it would take about 5 seconds for them to cross the 1,000 unit hex. Whereas the Slaughters going 240, that is almost 4 seconds, so if you are good about that, you will count how quickly, or at least be able to judge what ships you're up against. In this case, I'm going with the assumptions they're slaughters, although since I don't really practice this type of maneuver to kind of gauge what kind of ships they are, there is still a little bit of doubt in my mind, but I am going with this assumption that they are slaughters. And I do launch those fighters as... That's bad inconvenience. I making a bunch of noise there, I apologize, but with that said, I am assuming that these are slaughters, and since Saracen is kind of crossing those 2 kind of gas clouds, which is why I'm hesitant, or at least launching my fighters now, as opposed to earlier to get vision, I am launching him to kind of give me that denial so he can't conveniently use the gas clouds for good effect. And I don't think I actually checked what these ships are, but it's like I said already, I'm assuming they're slaughters since I already prioritized their engines before identifying them. And you can kind of see the speed boost here, but I do recall the fighters back to reveal the rest of the cruisers that were not activated. And it's nice and convenient here because this one last ship that was not revealed is a bit of an annoyance if it were to block shots if I were to aim at something else. But this is a bit of a risky gambit. I may have delved into the disruption bomb a little bit too much, but thankfully the Wraithbone shift is enough speed, enough mobility to completely deny them shutting down my hollow field, so the risk paid off, and we permanently destroyed the engines of one of their slaughters in the process, which is going to be great due to the close range engagement we're likely to encounter here. And this is where I kind of would like to have the beacon on hand, since now I have almost no way to kind of have my do my damage on them there, so I kind of do everything I can to keep them at arm's length due to the limited range of the slaughters themselves. They do turn left, turn away from me, and I kind of have the gas cloud to give me that convenience, but thankfully with the permanent engine destruction, I still have something to shoot at, even though it's going to be out of the fight for most of the battle unless I deliberately fly close to the slaughter. But this is my thought process here. I feel like I have a bit of a window, even though I can't even see if the ships are turning around or not. But I do see their lances, and they're in lock-on stance, so they can still get some decent shots on me. But so far, the damage has been incredibly minimal, with just now suffering my first engine critical hit. So I want to say I'm still in good shape, but we still have 5 slaughters to deal with, and I see them on the main map, but it glitched out in a way that I don't actually see their icons on the map itself or on the main screen. So I'm a little bit worried about trying to do an attack run, because with how precise you need to turn your prow, to get at least be able to reliably hit the target you want. Not being able to see those blips is a bit of a burden, so I just turn to the gas cloud, just try and grab this one objective to at least drag out the match if it does turn into objective-based victory. Since I am a little bit reluctant, since the ramming potential, I'm really worried about how powerful the ramming might be. Even though the slaughters have all broadside type weaponry with very little on the dorsals turrets, if they ram me, I'm worried that I might lose the game attrition that way. But the pulsars are striking true. Sadly, one of my ships, well, actually I didn't realize all three of them got sapped. I expected the second group to have gotten the helifield down, but nonetheless, they're charging in here super aggressively, super close range, and I do get the bomber hits at least. And stasis bombs to try again to keep him at bay, as opposed to pincer him down. And with this one cruiser permanently losing its engines, I kind of am just relegated to permanently facing towards a ship to maybe shoot some torpedoes and do some damage. Since there's no point in running away with it, so why not get the best value I can out of its pulsars. Even though the pulsar shots are a little bit erratic due to a little bit of inconsistency and glitchiness to the pulsars, even with me saying priority to number 1 on certain ships, I know sometimes it does not hit the ship I actually am aiming towards. But that could be very easily due to its limit arc as well, so I will have to experiment a little bit with that, to say the least. But yeah, this slow little thing is, well, this one has temporary engine damage, but conveniently, even though I lost my engines, I still get to keep my full hull field charge, and like I said before, the 83 armor on this, when you factor in the hull field, does give these incredibly good resilience, since I don't think I've taken that drastic amount of damage it looks like. It is a bit split out, or a little bit spread out, just because of the inconvenience of Saracen having to use his broadside weapons to shoot at me, so he can't really chase me the best if he wants to hit with the macro weaponry, but now we're in the where I'm really terrified of. The ramming potential I feel like would be a nightmare if I don't have torpedoes to kind of punish such a play, which I do use torpedoes to deal with the cripple ships really damn well. And this third slaughter just mutinies, and I'm hoping to finish it off really damn quickly. Since its deck is not gone, and sadly I am denied by just one measly hit point, or however many hit points it actually has. But this is the convenience of having the ship spread, although it goes without saying how chaotic and micro-intensive this might be. Being able to attack in multiple ways like that, and it helps minimize the overkill a little bit, which can be a bit of a burden with the pulsars, but I haven't had the best luck with my maelstrom so far, but it keeps them moving, it keeps them displaced, tries to anyway, and this stasis bomb can also be used to my benefit some, since technically my one cruiser in the stasis bomb gets to keep its charge for the holofield, even though it's not really moving, due to the convenience the stasis bomb provides. And unless I'm being rammed, that's not really a bad thing, because pulsars go right through the stasis bomb as well. But that's 3 cruisers down, the flagship is out. What looked really tenuous for me definitely was a pretty solid victory. I don't even think I lost a single cruiser, but I do wonder a little bit about if Saracen were to recklessly ram me, how that would play out. Sure, I had torpedoes to possibly punch that heavily, but it's mostly just theory crafting and not really criticizing Saracen's play, if I were to be honest, since I don't know how exactly it would play out. Since if I were to bounce this side of the cruiser, then their broadside could freely hit me at point blank range, and that's where I worry about things might go badly for me, especially with the slaughter's additional health and just having more ships in general. Okay, the second match of Season 3, and we're getting another match with Chaos. Although this one is a little bit different since we do see the Nurgle trait, so I can make easier assumptions on what I'm up against. But at the same time, I don't recognize the player. It seems like a Russian type of player, maybe judging by the name roughly, but I go in here thinking maybe it's a lower experienced player, so it's possible I may be having easier time in this bout, although I already know the results of that, but it will remain to be seen how this plays out differently as opposed to Saracen. In this case though, my opponent's going with like the spoilers and like heavier bulk as opposed to the 6 slaughters, so they are going to be a little bit slower and harder to maneuver their ships too, so in theory, I have a lot easier time to avoid getting rammed, and at least almost always have the positional advantage if I utilize it properly. But I do generally consider using the polarized field here, just for the convenience of using asteroid belts to my advantage, at least vaguely, since I can't really contemplate much other upgrades I want. And at the same time, the asteroid belts do also confer an accuracy penalty to any ships that are shooting at me, especially if I try and use them to conceal my ships. And initially I do prioritize engines on some of the ships and then the deck on others, thinking maybe I can prioritize my boarding a little bit on the one with the, at least where I'm prioritizing the deck, to maybe force a mutiny out of it. Although with no idea what I'm up against, I'm kind of thinking maybe Grand Cruisers initially, since at least it's the most, it would at least have the same type of ships. But when I see the fighters come out, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Basically 2 despoilers, what looks like to be a Devastation, but with the new battle cruiser type of variant that has 2 launch bays. I'm uncertain if that's the battle cruiser or just the Devastation or not. So this in theory should be a lot more simpler match, just again because of the lack of mobility, and hell, the despoiler is even slower than that of the regular cruisers and the Desolator. Never mind the fact that it's a battleship in general with its slower turning speed. But I easily think on how to deny these fighters, and I just use the asteroid belt and the convenience of my polarized holofield to just at least make them lose target. Sure, I'm likely to get revealed anyway since these fighters and bombers are still coming, but as you can see, they are bombers, so they are the one things that could probably effectively deny my holofield and do decent damage, especially with the bombers apparently going 600 unit speed, or 650 rather, as opposed to 450 of almost all the other bombers. So I do need to take them seriously. They may not cost me the match, but I should respect the potential of the bombers, especially with such heavy fighter bays that they have access to as well. But right off the bat, I am easily gaining a nice position to maybe focus down into one cruiser there, which I think may be a Carnage. It doesn't have any fighter bays of note, so I'm thinking maybe it's a Carnage, or it could be like a Hades or something of that sort. I don't recall if it had a Proud Lance or not, but we'll know in a moment once we get engaged. And again, the gas clouds immediately deny the bombers. So this is a nice convenience here where I can use the asteroid belts as well to deny the fighters and bombers, but I still get revealed, of course, since they still are flying on by as opposed to immediately running away. But we got ourselves a nice attack. Oh, it actually is a Devastation, it looks like, so it's full on fighter bays is what we're looking at. And I did change the priority to the engines, but we still got critical hits on the generator and on the deck there, it looks like. And with it completely isolated now, since the other Devastation is kind of moving away, so I got easy pickings on this one ship. It's not going to be pretty, folks. And with the ships going in one at a time, it does make it a little bit awkward in like a big cluster type of fight like with Saracen in the last match. But in this case, it keeps the shields from recharging due to that little bug with the Spear Crystal Lenses and Disruption Overcharge. Since the 20-second recharge on these pulsars is like the only thing they could actually punish by regenerating their shields quickly with like supercharged void shields, or at least eventually recharge. But I don't hesitate on using the Maelstrom, especially with their own stasis bomb kind of deterring them from boosting, but they will get out of it nonetheless relatively quickly. And again, it helps isolate the ship a little bit more for potential torpedoes. But as you've seen, the wreckage kind of got in the way a little bit from the first cruiser I destroyed. That's going to be something I'm going to need to be very mindful of. Then having any of my pulsars get denied just by inconvenient wreckage, let alone wreckage that I caused, let's keep that in mind too, can easily blunt these type of attacks, especially since I need to pay attention more to watching the clock as well. But torpedoes are going to strike true here. I'm very damn confident of it now. Hell, even my opponent's going to accommodate me and fly right into them. Didn't hit with everything. It looks like I actually only hit with 4 torpedoes. And my opponent could boost out of here, but it doesn't look like they're going to dodge most of them. And there are 4 torpedo hits there. And with the isolated nature of this battleship, it's still really damn easy pickings. This is without a doubt a much more simplistic type of match, which goes to what I said earlier. But being able to deny those bombers effectively in the first few minutes helps a ton. Because again, they could just soften up my ships pretty damn well, and hell, I don't know how much focus these bombers were, but again, without any fighter support, and due to the fact I'm shooting down their carrier ships effectively, they have a lot less bombers and fighters well, they don't even have the convenience of launching fighters to kind of screen now at this point, with the cruisers separate from the battleship. I do a bit of a misplay, kind of launching the torpedoes while the stasis bomb is up. And the reason that's bad is just simply because it gives them more time for their point defense, let alone if they launch fighters, to just shoot those down before they do the damage necessary. And we'll just pay no attention to that complete whiff there, but at the same time, I'm very confident in my position here, and hell, the brace for impact soaked a lot of damage there, never mind the fact again, almost half my torpedoes never really hit. So even with the big size of these battleships, they are still doing decent at dodging most of those shots, so broadsides are the way to go. Which goes again to what I said before about maybe Saracens should try ramming me, and that was inconvenient. I thought it was clear of the rush or for the Wraithbone shift, or actually I thought it was a different ship, to be honest, when I did that boost. So I inconveniently rammed myself for a little bit of damage there, but it goes without saying, this is a victory now. It's just a matter of cleaning up, grabbing objectives, or best yet, just destroy this one last devastation that we have to deal with. If only temporary engine damage on my ships, I should be in good shape. It's just a matter of just waiting it out, and more bombers are coming in now. This is where I'm just first seeing them, and I launched the fires preemptively, although as you can see, it's not really needed even without the brace for impact with its additional effects. This is kind of why the fighters are so damn important, and why a carrier type fleet with chaos is so much more restricted if they start losing their ships. And I do a little bit of a maneuver here. I use the one cruiser to try and ram and kill off this frigate before kamikazes onto mine. But as you can see, it was for naught. I kind of helped the cruiser actually kill my ship by pushing it forward some. But yeah, as their ships start going down, the carrier fleet's just drastically much more weaker. Just because you can't really split up the spoilers fighters and bombers into like have a squadron of half and half. That would actually be a nice little feature maybe later on down the road, possibly, to maybe be able to mix up your fighters and bombers count. So at least that way, even if you're not a heavy carrier fleet, you might be able to have your one carrier ship be self-sufficient that way. Like my one carrier ship that I currently have in my fleet, maybe have it launch a single fighter squadron mixed with bombers, since that was a feature you could do in the tabletop. And your only downside, of course, is that you were restricted on how fast your bombers could go, since they were normally the slower fighters, or at least the slower ordnance of the two. So you were restricted a tiny bit there, but the fighters screened very effectively, and that would help a little bit. And at least with fleets that are going heavy on the fighters and bombers, it just would be really awkward with the charges, since they are kind of separate at the moment. But I like to think it was heavily mitigated, just this strategy, just due to the convenience of me using the asteroid belt and the gas cloud to kind of just deny them right off the bat, since they do still have that global presence after all. But ultimately, a very damn simplistic match, and I don't know what exactly my opponent's saying. I feared maybe they were a little bit raging at me, since it did not look like they were saying good game, if I were to make an assumption of it at least. Okay, this match is going to be a little bit different because of course it's Drukhari versus Asuryani. One is completely invisible at almost all times, and the other one is kind of visible but a little bit more burst potential, just because I have 5 cruisers with potentially all can be equipped with torpedoes, versus normally what they would have would be there's 3 battleships and maybe a light cruiser for the burst damage with torpedoes. But in this case, we're going to be dealing with like impalers and that kind of shenanigans, although it's going to be a little bit different than what I'm used to in that case. Although, with how these matches tend to play out, normally the Drukhari wants to commit kamikaze if they have the firepower to kind of justify such a close range engagement with their, ramming blades, which did get nerfed, but before with the 50% increase to their ramming damage, there may have been some really strong merits to that, especially with the need to kind of turn off my hollow fields in any form if they want to get the full damage possible. Otherwise, Asuryani, at least in straight fights, I want to argue are just a better faction in this type of matchup. It ultimately does come down to how effectively I can hit with torpedoes, which a lot of the times can be negated. And in an odd type of setup here, I do decide to go with the additional like bravery on all my ships, kind of thinking, again, is this going to be a game of attrition as opposed to cat and mouse, where Drukhari, I would argue, are kind of strongest at. But as we're going to see here, I'm thinking these are all Impalers right off the bat, but in truth, 2 of those squadrons are actually fighter ships. My opponent decided to go with the more expensive type of carrier ships as opposed to all Impalers, so all the ships we saw there is just 3 battleships and a frigate. They are pretty limited on their firepower, at least their number of ships, so if I can engage them effectively, they're not really going to have much for outmaneuvering me or getting behind me with like a light cruiser, or even just grabbing points off on the side. And you can see the one frigate right there with its 2 torpedo salvos. We kind of know what to expect. But I'm caught completely off guard here, but at the same time I try and mitigate these fighters to the best of my ability. And them having 6 fighter squadrons to my 2, there's no hope in hell I can actually deal with these Impalers the best. But I still have called arms to help mitigate some of this damage, and hell, I get myself a nice free frigate on the side. And ultimately, I'm just going to engage it recklessly here, since again, most of their firepower is relegated to their fighters and bombers, which they just launched. So I feel like I could do this, although they just did a ridiculous amount of boarding right there, conveniently, and those were the regular boarding assaults too. Which they did have time to recharge, but my opponent's squandering their invisibility a little bit here. It goes without saying, I'm getting a nice little treat with them just making it easy for me to shoot them down. Hell, I did just destroy the generators too, it looks like, on this one battleship. Which helps to time this matter for constantly putting pressure on them, but torpedoes are a bit of a blunt, or don't really do anything at all in this regard, but I am content to just ram these ships all together, because at the same time, my opponent can't really shoot me at all, and I just gotta keep in their face so I can keep getting vision, since I inconveniently don't have the beacon. Since I want to use it, I kind of want to encourage this forward engagement, which is why I launched the beacon as I did, way back on the slightly on the left, so my opponent would not have the convenience to just circle around me, was the idea. So this is a nice convenience for me here a little bit, being able to just fight them head on, which maybe the beacon did pay off in that sense. It's hard to be certain, to be honest, since it would be nice if my opponent ran away from me, but again, with my additional speed and additional cruiser coming on in here, thanks to the cold arms to help mitigate a little bit of that troop damage, I'm comfortable getting this kill. And that additional armor is not going to do much good, because hell, even this one cruiser I think is technically shooting on the broadside or the side of the ship. So you're getting no armor value at all. I just need to hit with the torpedoes to try and kill these things quickly, because good god, the boarding assaults and the Impalers are definitely doing work, but if I could kill them faster, then their boarding doesn't really mean much, does it now? Since they already basically killed off the crew of almost 3 of my ships right there, so if it drags out, then I could be in trouble. And as I said already, I kind of want to recklessly pursue this, and with the torpedoes to complement it, this battleship is all but dead. And that's pretty much game right there in a nutshell. Short, sweet, and in all honesty, I feel like the Drukhari should play a more drawn-out type of match, especially since their firepower is so much more limited. And as a little bit of a treat, we're actually going to get that in the next match, since I'm going to be face off against the same Drukhari opponent, and they're going to discipline themselves to not actually do such an aggressive maneuver this time. So we'll get to see a little bit of the difference there. So now we're going to have our rematch with Ab Order Prince? I honestly can't remember off the top of my head now, and I just saw it. Ab Order Prince. Okay, I was close enough. A Border Prince, maybe? My head wants to go Ab Order. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's disrespectful. It doesn't matter. We're face off against the Drukhari, and I'm expecting maybe more of the same, like I said, but as I kind of hinted at, my opponent decided to do a bit of a change of tactic here, since arguably if my torpedoes strike true, there's not really much they could do about it, since they're sacrificing the majority of their firepower rather, for the convenience of doing heavy boarding damage. And while I still need to get used to how to best mitigate that boarding damage, especially with 2 fighter squadrons, I feel like I could comfortably deal with Impalers with a single fighter squadron, just because my one cruiser, my flagship, can negate that really damn well, especially with some good point defense. And never mind, the Impaler's speed was also nerfed a bit too, as opposed to the fighters being increased, which ultimately does compound a tiny bit, having the fighters being even faster, just because it leaves that much more space for the Impalers to get isolated and intercepted by frigates, light cruisers, or at least anything that can get on top of them and have their point defense freely shoot at the Impalers. Although normally, with 2 Impaler squadrons, normally 3, you probably don't have to worry about that as much. You just need the fighter squadron to at least be readily available to help mitigate that effectively. And hell, I do go brace for impact stance just to help prepare for that fact. Although, because my camera was following my flagship, they didn't actually get the order to actually patrol or defend the ship, so I mess up the cooldown a little bit there, and then I recall my fighters, hoping to have them available, at least for the Impalers themselves. Since we do have the convenience here of the Impalers and 1 squadron being on the far right, so I'm hoping to maybe shoot down this entire squadron before the Impalers get here, to make it a little bit easier for my fighters to kind of intercept the other 2. Since even if the fighters kind of intercept each other, if my fighters are in the path of the Impalers, they're still going to grab them and possibly do some damage to them at the same time. Very unlikely, but at least it buys me more time that way. And I do pinpoint which one they go after, so I'm trying to stall a little bit there. I am mindful I do have the stasis bomb, because hell, I figured we were going to have the same kind of match as 4, so I kind of forfeit the beacons, thinking my opponent would get aggressive on me. And we do see fighter bays. I'm assuming that's just regular boarding parties, since the 1 squadron got sniped. And I do effectively deal with the Impalers, that is a plus, and I deal with the 2nd boarding squadron as well, but they got more where that came from, and I used the stasis bomb to kind of try and negate the Wraithbone shift. Sadly, the flagship still gets heavily boarded as a result, but I do use cold arms on this point, right? Yeah, to help mitigate the troop damage quite a bit, and just resupply with other troops, because ideally I want to realistically prevent losing 2/3 of my crew for the permanent critical hit on whatever they're prioritizing, which you would think would be the engines. So I want to at least minimize the value they get from the boarding, since we technically did just take out 2 of their boarding squadrons, at least of the Impalers. And the regular boarding squadrons should be relatively easy to deal with, since if they don't have fighters to deal with those, they only got what, 20-30% evasion, I think? I honestly can't remember, since Eldari in general have better evasion to all their fighters and bombers. And since Drukhari are the only ones with boarding ships, it's hard to imagine what their stance is, but I lose track of the Drukhari, and conveniently I get to see them again with them launching more assault ships. In this case, there are absolutely no fighters, so I can easily deal with the surge charge of their Impalers incredibly well if I do this properly, just due, again, their lack of durability. It's going to be a little bit tricky because the Impalers are actually taking the point defense shots, so they're a lot more resilient just with their 12 hit points. But I do shoot down the Impalers at least, but the other ships do get their boarding in. How much is it again? I can't remember. Only 5 boarding out of a potential 12, I think. Since it's like 4 boarding assaults per squadron, or at least, yeah, 4 boarding ships per squadron, so I easily do negate about half of that, so it's still pretty good in that regard, and I cut the cold arms early, even though that can arguably look like a mistake after all, since it still incurs the 2-minute cooldown. But preserving my troops is probably one of my greatest strengths, and so far I'm feeling pretty comfortable, since again, we're negating the Impalers really damn well, which are probably the more problematic to deal with due to their increased health and durability. But in this case, my opponent is going to be launching fighters again. And I do have fighters at the ready, and we're going to try and intercept them. This is the plan, at least, to try and intercept them. And ideally, I have brace for impact even on to try and make sure these Impalers do not connect. I try my best to, but not all my point defense, not all my ships are actually able to contribute here. And sadly, even with my best attempts, I do misjudge how long it actually takes to deal with these fighter squadrons. So right now, my fighters are gone, my point defense are not really doing a whole lot, and I just now realizing, doing this commentary, that I didn't actually have a deck on my flagship. So sadly, those Impalers are going to get this strike completely unhindered almost. But I did hear the Wraithbone shift, and even though I'm technically blind, I do still have a vague direction on where to go. Hell, once the boarding is seen on the flagship, I do a little bit of a reckless gambit here and there. the second Wraithbone shift, this is the tell I need to kind of predict where to go. It is a vague direction, but I feel like I got the lucky gambit here. I get lucky. Because look what we just fished. We get a nice full salvo, pulsar shots, hell, even the extended range. And a couple of whiff torpedo shots still help to contribute, since I got way too close for my torpedoes to do actual damage in. Again, that is probably the most important factor when face off against Drukharis. I need to make sure my torpedoes strike true. And so far they are doing anything but. I'm still getting the ramming damage in though, and these 13 boarding assaults on their own aren't going to mean much, because that's, in an odd way, are just giving me permission to just commit kamikaze with that one ship. Completely get reckless, completely ram as much as I can. And while the call to arms is a little bit late, not really helpful since they do disengage. And my flagship is currently a derelict, so I'm trying to look to see what ships still have boarding available to maybe reactivate later on. But so far, the flagship is just going to get rammed to death. We see where the other two ships are, and as I said, kamikaze it up. Ideally trying to ram the one that's already been crippled, which thankfully works out pretty well, although the one cruiser I did send to reactivate the flagship does not help me, and we do get mutinies with the flagship's destruction. So that one ship is heavily crippled, if not just about dead, and this ram attempt helps cement that fact. Well, it wasn't even a ram, to be honest, it was just the torpedoes. And more engine critical hits to boot, just because of the mutiny itself in this case. So what was looking like an incredibly tenuous match for me, looking like I was going to lose in abysmal fashion. But at the same time, I think that was the last Impaler charge, to be honest. I can't remember the count off the top of my head, but all the Impalers would have been expended, which means my opponent would have to rely on boarding, which can be incredibly dangerous if they're not going to use their spear crystal lenses to kind of open up for lightning strikes, or even get in 4,500 unit range for the regular boarding assault. So while I do feel like that I may have gotten lucky, at the same time maybe I blunted a lot of the boarding damage below that could have been dealt, since the assault ships themselves could have been a lot more easier to manage with only a single fighter squadron to deal with. Never mind the fact that if they had no fighters available because I destroyed that one cruiser and they were able to evade, it still would have helped a lot there. But at the same point, or at this point rather, we only have a frigate to deal with, and I have plenty of health to my ships. It's just a question of if my flagship can get an inconvenient crew kill. Was it a crew critical hit on it, where it kills off the one crew that activate, but we spot where the one frigate is. It tries to go in for a killing blow on this thing with torpedoes no less, but thankfully that's not an issue at all. I just wait for the Wraithbone shift, I go in for the reckless charge, and wasn't even planned, but the flagship's able to contribute getting the killing blow. A much more costly match, it goes without saying, but I feel like that's how Drukhari should try and play, especially if they're going Impalers and boarding centric. I just don't know if going with 2 fighters or 2 carrier ships as opposed to 2 Impaler ships is the right path. Hard to honestly say, but I did underestimate when the final Impaler squadron did manage to connect at least, so that made it really awkward for me, and I honestly do feel like I got lucky detecting their fleet with that Wraithbone shift rush.